Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? I've got a trucking story for this video, but I'm going to hold off on it because I know that I'm putting Steelheart on the thumbnail and I don't want to bury the lead here. Steelheart is a 2013 young adult dark superhero novel from Brandon Sanderson, first in a trilogy, and I think there were a few more books written in the series and in the world. It was really cool. I think the first one was the strongest, and then even though I've given all three of these books 5 stars, if I were to go back and read them again, I would probably struggle to get through portions here and there. It's one of those series that this is kind of a signature Sanderson move. He likes to kind of over-explain the mechanics of it, but that's what a lot of his core fans like. The more books of his that I read, the more that I noticed this, and the less interested I was in that particular element of the story. But we'll get to that in a minute. The general gist of Steelheart is that something happens in the world that gives people superpowers. The catch is that everybody who has powers is evil. So really there are no heroes other than just vanilla mortal guys with guns. And anybody who has power is like by the power, driven to do evil things. And the main villain is a guy named Steelheart. He is, for all intents and purposes, an evil Superman. He's got the look of Superman. He's got basically all of Superman's powers, with the addition that he can turn things into steel. And he even takes over Chicago and does this great inversion or whatever where he turns the entire city and everything in it into steel. He can turn people into steel statues. He can do all kinds of stuff. It's bad. The story opens up with a prologue. There's this kid who's 8 years old, and he's at the bank when Steelheart pops in. There's another bad guy doing some jiggery-pokery. And in the ensuing conflict, something happens and Steelheart actually gets hurt and bleeds. And that's an important thing for little David to see, because he realizes later when he's older that, wait a minute, there's something that can hurt Steelheart. We need to figure out what it is. And they spend the whole book, him and the people that he teams up with, they spend the entire book figuring out how to hurt this villain. And then the rest of the trilogy is concerned with pulling at that thread and unraveling it and figuring out what's causing people to have these powers and how to put a stop to it. You get it. Without doing a full review of this trilogy, because I would need to reread it. I haven't read them since, the last one came out in 2015, and I read it shortly thereafter. I've thought later on about how some of the villains and some of the characters with their powers were just way too overpowered, to the point where, I understand you got to suspend some kind of disbelief if you've got a series that has superpowers in it. But where's the threshold? Where's the line in the sand? Because you've got guys that can pull a gun out, and if they're holding the gun, then the gun never runs out of ammunition. It's okay, well, now you're talking about creating matter and energy ex nihilo, and that is on par with, effectively an omnipotent God. So why do they have the power to do something so extraordinary, but it's confined to such a limited thing? That's one reason why I want to reread the series, because I want to examine it with that exact question in mind and see what I can extrapolate from the text that might answer that question. There was another character who, she was literally a multiverse portal all in one. She could open multiverses and pull different versions of herself out of it. And I was okay, where's the line? Where's the boundary? What stops any of these characters from being OP, from being overpowered? In the 60s, or whenever it was that Marvel created the X-Men, Stan Lee jokingly said that he created mutants, not jokingly, I guess this is really why he did it. He created mutants because he got tired of coming up with individual origin stories for everybody's powers. So he just gave them whatever cool powers he wanted them to have, and he would just say, you're a mutant. You get guys like Gambit, same thing. He can create almost limitless energy, it seems, ex nihilo. Rogue, her power is that she can take powers and life force from other people. Jubilee can make fireworks. Professor X and Jean Grey are both telepaths, although she's also a telekinetic. Wolverine has his mutant healing factor. The adamantium thing is an addition. It seems like, for the most part, these powers are narrowly defined for the individual, but at the same time, like, a mutant can be anything. And while that worked for, I mean, it works in the comic books, and it especially worked for comics of yesteryear, where they cared less about that than they did about coming up with a colorful character that could do cool things, and then giving them a story and saying, okay, this is about a guy trying to unravel a secret of his past, or this is about an outsider who everybody hates him, but he's a good outsider, and he's trying to stop the bad outsiders because they give all the outsiders a bad name. There's a strong story there, and the costume and the superpower just becomes like a window dressing that makes it even cooler. But now we're in an era where fantasy and sci-fi are, we'll say, enriched by more rigid definitions for the mechanics of the world. And Sanderson he carries a lot of the responsibility for that. Elantris was a glyph and language-based magic system. Mistborn is a metal-based magic system. I remember the selling point before Way of Kings came out, way back in 08 or 09, was that he had a fantasy series with 30 magic systems in it. And I thought, wow, if that's like Mistborn and Elantris, that's just going to be a lot of really cool magic systems. And then I got like 2.5 books into that series, and I was like, okay, we found one magic system. What the heck is going on? But I personally find all that stuff exhausting to track when I'm reading a book and I want to follow the plot and the characters. The mechanics of the magic system not only become a character unto themselves, they become such an overbearing and over-prevalent component of the story that I've got to keep track of that independent of what's going on with the characters and the plot. And that's just the kind of reader that I am. I guess it's technically something that also frustrates me about lit RPG, because we spend so much time away from the characters and the plot, which are the two main pillars of a story. And we spend so much time staring at the world and explaining how it works and running through stat sheets. But I digress. With the whole Steelheart thing, I guess my question is, like, how much power is too much? As far as the mechanics of a world are concerned, how much power is too much? I've been working on building my own kind of superhero system, world building thing for a couple of years now. And one rule that I've had for myself, sorry, there's an ambulance coming by. One rule that I've had for myself is I want this to be a world where people can gain powers, but there has to be a limitation on it and a range. They can't randomly be one guy like Beast, where he acts like an animal and he grows blue hair. But also the mutant gene can make you into Wolverine with a healing factor, or Sabretooth, where you're 7 feet tall and you have a healing factor and you're covered with hair like a giant bear. But also Jubilee, who can shoot fireworks out of her hands, and Storm, who can control the weather. Like, I am interested in the physics of that, to the extent that I want it to be consistent. If you can manipulate energy around you, what's the core of that manipulation power? Where is it coming from? What are the limitations? And how far in detail do I need to go with that before it starts to affect and overshadow the story? If people have superpowers in this world, then they've got to be vaguely similar and vaguely limited. So you'll have a whole range of people that can fly to an extent, a whole range of people that can be close to speedsters to an extent, people that have other similar powers that are focused on maybe one particular sense, but extrapolated in different directions, to where if they were all to go to a lab and sit down and get studied, the scientists could come back and say, this is all connected to the same region of your brain, and you've all adapted to it in this direction. And this is where you process energy and turn it into this and whatever. Like, I would like a rigid definition, but I don't want the story itself to be about the rigid definition, because I feel like it could become more believable if it was about that, if it had that rigid definition. but it wouldn't be slowed down by the constant need to explain it. So it's kind of a looking behind the curtain type thing. Like, it's stuff that I would need to know as the writer, but the reader wouldn't necessarily need to be bogged down with it. If they want to know what the limitations are, they just read the story and see what the character is limited by. Just an example of something that I would write and how it would be different from something one of these other authors would write. But yeah, I'm due to reread Steelheart and what's the second one called? Firefight, and I think the third one is Calamity. There was a short story called Mitosis. I don't know if that's available in print. I read it. It happens between the first and the second book. It's fine. There's a villain who's kind of like multiple man. So again, like, how do you create so much extra mass and energy, and there's no mental and memory drift between the different versions that you split into? I don't know. I think, again, he's just going back to saying, like, well, this is basically like a cosmic chaos god from another dimension. It's like, well, then why are there any limitations on this thing at all? I don't know. I guess I'll find out when I do get around to reading them again. Those are my thoughts on superpowers and the extent of explaining the rules in a story and the merit thereof, as well as, like, you need to be aware not to make your characters too overpowerful, or else the reader will start wondering, well, why don't they just snap their fingers like Q from Star Trek and make everything exactly the way they want it? I don't know. I guess we'll see. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Check the description for a link to my Amazon page. Go buy one of my books and read it and tell me what you think. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.